All right, I would like to welcome you all to our second episode of Talk with the Mayor, here with Brian Bagley and Scott Converse from the Longmont Observer. So,
Hi.
we got a bunch of questions for you today, and we are going to be doing this hopefully as a video podcast and as a audio podcast, so we'll be actually doing two types. Turns out people like to listen and not watch. Some people like to watch and listen. So.
Well, watch and listen.
All right, so we've got a bunch of questions here for you today.
Okay.
So let's just go ahead and dive into it.
All right, great.
All right. So the City Council now is holding these regular Friday morning sessions, every other weekish.
Yeah.
Yeah. To discuss things like board and commission updates and general discussion items, stuff like that. What kind of things are you going to be discussing at these meetings? Why do you have them, and why should we care?
Right. Well, I think, first of all, it's not every other week. It's the Friday directly prior to each regular session.
Right.
City Council meeting.
Okay.
And so, which is approximately every other week, and ish. And I believe the impetus, the person behind it was Councilmember Marcia Martin, and Marcia felt, and I don't necessarily disagree with her desire, because I share it. And the whole idea was that she wanted an opportunity to have a more informal setting for council members to just talk without Robert's Rules of Order, without public invited to be heard, without the pomp and circumstance, just to talk, hash things out. She likes to use the term roll up our sleeves, and just kind of get to know each other, not just on issues, but just as people. And so she came up with and proposed the idea, and the majority of City Council agreed that, hey, why don't we get together on Fridays? And I theoretically control my own schedule because I own my own business, and Councilmember Finley is retired, and so is Councilmember Peck and Mayor Pro Tem Christensen and Councilmember Waters, and Councilmember Rodriguez isn't retired, but his schedule is also somewhat flexible. So we figured, hey, why not 8:30 on a Friday morning? And what we will be discussing, we have a standing agenda where we kind of share, each council member and the mayor, of course, we have assignments. The city has advisory committees such as Art and Public Places, or the Museum Advisory Board, or the Library Advisory Board. And then there's also committees that aren't just advisory, but are actually quasi-judicial, like the Planning and Zoning Board. Or in my case, I sit on the Platte River Power Board. And so, or the Mayors and Commissioners Committee, or the Metro Mayors Caucus. And so that Friday, the thought was, will give us an opportunity to come together and kind of share with each other what's going on in our committees. So, for example, Tim Waters, I've talked to Tim, and council has talked to Tim. And again, I have a hard time calling him Tim because he's still Dr. Waters to me as a young kid growing up in Greeley. But in talking with Dr. Waters, I would like him to continue serving on the Longmont Housing Authority Board, for example. And that still is an ongoing situation where there's a lot of change and administrative turnover and turmoil, and we got to make sure that comes out okay. So that Friday meeting would be an ideal place for him to come and report and tell us what he thinks should be done. And we could offer our support and maybe our ideas and our opinions, and look at staff and say, well, how can we support LHA? And that's just one example, but I think that was the idea. And then if there's other issues, like, who knows, any issue that might be coming up that we feel that instead of just hitting a button at the dais and just having our say and then moving on, that Friday morning might be able to provide some dialogue and debate as well. So that, I think, was the purpose of the meeting. I would much rather have shorter Tuesday night meetings and do that maybe in the time we've already set aside. But hey, if my fellow city council wants to meet, I'm in. They're good people. I enjoy hanging out with them, so I'm in.
It's sort of like a more informal version of a pre-meeting almost.
Correct. You've got your regular session, then you have your study session. This is more of a Friday morning donut session.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Is it open to everybody?
Yes, it's an open meeting. It's posted. We post the agenda, just like city council meetings, pursuant to charter. We have to. And the whole idea of the Friday morning meeting was Marcia and others were, God, it's really tough. I mean, because city council, one person, of course, doesn't need to announce that he's going to be thinking about a topic. 2 people, they can get together and have phone calls. Even 3 people can have a meeting that's not announced as long as that meeting is held in public. Meaning, if you were a council member and there was one more here, my door's shut and locked, I think. And so we'd be in violation of Colorado sunshine laws. However, if we opened the door and decided to get together, we're not. But a 4th person decides to join us, and if it's a planned meeting, you need to post that and tell the press that, hey, we're going to be meeting and here are the topics of conversation. And so Friday morning meeting was kind of the natural result, the natural solution.
So question, kind of related to that a little bit. You guys have, I noticed actually in the calendar that you have, following every city council meeting, it's on your calendar that says, let's meet at Mike O'Shea's. Kind of just as a discussion, council members are invited. Is this, how does that fit into this? Is that open? What is that?
Yeah, it is.
Technically.
It is. And so, I mean, that's a tradition that council's done. I don't know who started it or when, but it was certainly already ongoing when I joined council.
I've seen it. It's been done for a while, but I didn't know if it was...
So no, it's the whole idea was, hey, after council meeting, why don't we go down to O'Shea's, the pump house, pick a locale and just go decompress, talk about things either that aren't related to council or perhaps in a manner and using language that we wouldn't necessarily use in a formal political public meeting. Yeah. And so usually there's a couple of council people that go and the city managers, the city attorney, some staff members. And it's just, I mean, nothing like chicken wings and a Diet Coke to get to know your colleagues. Yeah. But no, that's also open to the public.
So does the public ever show up for it?
No, we've never had. Well, let me think.
Probably rarely.
I think there have been a couple members of the public, but they were more, at the time, kind of like the standard attendees, people who, talk with us, got to know us, kind of like...
Strider guys.
Yeah, Strider Benson. He has come a couple of times. Strider Benson he's awesome. Yeah, so he's come.
We should do a profile on Strider.
There you go, profile. You should have podcasts with Strider. And so lately we haven't done it much because, at least me, I mean, maybe I should rethink this, but usually Tuesday, either we're going late, and I'm anxious to get home because I wake up the next day at 5:30. Or it's early, and I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I have time to go see my kids, maybe read them a book or get home and just spend it with my wife and children. So I don't know if they're going, but usually I'm running out right after city council thinking, free time or no. If we get out at 10, I know they're already in bed, and that I'd be more inclined to say, hey, why don't we go ahead and go meet at O'Shea's or the Pump House. But and also I think it'd be a good idea if people are listening, if there is a locale out there and you're saying, God, why did they only do the show O'Shea's and the Pump House? If there's a place that you want to see us meet and visit, let us know. Yeah. Just make sure there's food, chicken wings and Diet Coke after 10.
Love it. So, Mike Dougherty versus Mike Foote.
And that's
when this is the DA race. It's happening.
And that is a difficult topic for me.
And you don't have to. I mean,
I know. But it's all. I've learned that everything's fair game in this beautiful world of local politics.
What do you call it? It's a contact sport.
It's a full contact sport. It's a blood sport. Right? Yeah,
blood sport.
Yeah, blood sport. Right. So no, it's all fair. And so so when I say you have to be careful, let me put on a different hat, right? So as mayor, I sit on some boards and I chair the city council meeting, right? And people look at me and expect me to attend specific events where the city needs to be represented. Mm-hmm. So like, for example, we had the first annual Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta event this Sunday. And so I went. I'm the mayor, right? Or we might have a ribbon cutting for Smuckers. I will go because I am the mayor. It's not Brian Bagley. I'm representing the office of the chairman of city council, and it is expected and appreciated, at least I think, that the mayor shows up to basically represent Longmont. And so, and the mayor also gets involved sometimes for political races. Like, for example, Mayor Dennis Coombs supported me and endorsed me in my political race. As a city councilman, I've endorsed, as mayor, I've endorsed certain candidates. So there's nothing inappropriate about that. But here, and I preface this with, I know both Mike Foote and Michael Dougherty in a non-political manner.
Well, you are a lawyer.
I am a lawyer.
In your day.
Yeah. So I mean, I've got 20 employees and 10 lawyers, and we practice all over northern Colorado, and we do personal injury, family law, and criminal defense. And so I knew Mike, his reputation and his work when he was down south, and I know Mike, his reputation and his work when he was in Boulder. As a matter of fact, I've had both of these gentlemen on opposite ends of the cases that I have had personally, as well as my attorneys. And so I know Mike Foote. Well, I mean, we'll be in the juvenile division dealing with a 12-year-old who was accused of some, heinous crime. And we're trying to figure out, okay, A, how do we protect the community? B, how do we rehabilitate this child so there's a 0% chance of recidivism, or I guess that means of him reoffending in the future. And we're trying to negotiate and hash things out. And so I know these men from a professional viewpoint as well. And both of them are very, very high qualified, well-respected individuals. That said, so me and my firm, we stand willing and ready to work with Mike Dougherty, the current district attorney,
right,
as well as whoever might win in the race in November. However, I have donated to Mike Foote. I have endorsed Mike Foote. Mike Foote, for the simple reason that Mike has run for office 3 times and won. And I think that if I were an executive, if I were the guy that gets to hire, looking at Mike Dougherty's resume, he's been endorsed by Joe Pelly and Stan Garnett. And if I were hiring, Mike Dougherty might be the best managerial choice, right? I mean, he's run offices before. But Mike has shown excellent leadership in the several years that he's represented us in his House district, and I think that should be rewarded. He loves Longmont. He's done a great job. He's an outstanding attorney as well as district attorney, and I think that Mike's done a great job. But then again, I break bread with Mike Dougherty too. They're both good guys.
In talking to them, we interviewed both of them. One of them, I won't say which one, said, yeah, we're both called Mike. We're both 45. We both pretty much have the same stances. Pretty much everything.
And right now, so
they're really similar.
Yeah, and so like even now, in retrospect, if you go back and watch this podcast, I mean, I knew what Mike I was referring to when I said Mike, but so let me be clear. They're both good men. I've endorsed Mike Foote, and I've donated to his campaign. Yeah. I break bread and interact with them both, and they're both excellent attorneys. And whoever wins, I said it about my races, and I mean it even more so here. We are very fortunate to have 2 excellent candidates for district attorney, and may the best man win.
Yeah, can't really lose actually. So we can't, the people.
Yeah, the people are set.
Yeah, it's a good thing. Right, here's a fun one. Sarah Levison. So her court case got pushed today. So they were going to have a final hearing, I think.
And it wasn't today? It got pushed again?
It got pushed again because her attorney was not apparently available. Or
okay.
Conflict. So I don't know if that affects whether or not you want to comment on this, but
no. Again, blood sport, all's fair in Longmont politics, my friend. No, I mean, what do you want to know? What questions do you have?
So there's obviously a conflict between the two of you. There was. That's kind of
that, to be fair, yes.
And I'll give you kind of the outsider's perspective. Is Sarah poked you. She basically started this by saying, "Hey, there are some issues with campaign financing and over here, and there was a small fine for you." And then you said, well, let's look at Sarah's, and when the city did, there was a large fine for her, from $200 for you and $16,000 for her.
Right.
Then there was a process where you guys as a council said, oh man, that hurts. Is that really how we want to operate? And you instructed the city not to enforce that fine. Right. And I believe that Sarah...
Well, kind of right, yeah.
All right, well, you can clarify when I finish my side of the story, because I'm telling you what it looks like.
That's right.
And then the last piece of it is that Sarah was like, no, I want my name cleared so that if I wanted, for instance, to run in the future, I could. So there's not something sitting on the books out there.
Right.
That's what it looked like to all of us. So what's your take on all of this?
What's my take on all this? So I've always... talking gets me in trouble, but then again, I've always done it.
Never stopped.
And I've never stopped, right? So first of all, I have the utmost respect for former Councilmember Levison. I sat next to her for 4 years. Literally, I was here. She was right next to me. And I respect her intellect. I respect the passion and the commitment that she has for the community. She ran a great campaign. She even now, she continues to be engaged. She sits on as an alternate on the Planning and Zoning Committee, and so so she's as a person, I think Sarah Levison is a good person, you know. I was a little surprised. I got a phone call from Valerie Skitt, and I was actually sitting right at that desk. And so, and the gist of the phone call was, Brian, someone has...
Valerie's the city clerk.
Valerie's the city clerk.
Right.
And so she says, I don't remember if she said Brian or Mayor or Bagley or whatever, but she said, Brian, we've got a little problem. I said, what's that problem? She goes, I was just handed a complaint. Someone's alleging that you violated the Longmont Fair Campaign Practices Act. And the first thing that goes through my mind is, no way. No, I didn't. I mean, that's why I hire a CPA and a campaign manager and people to take care of that stuff. No way. What's the allegation? And so she explained that someone had claimed that I failed to put paid for by Bagley for mayor on 2 mailers. And immediately I reached down on the bottom shelf right over there, pulled out my campaign packet, the stuff that I put everything in, and sure enough, my final 2 mailers that I paid for, that I designed, that my campaign did, failed to put paid for by Bagley for mayor. And so immediately I'm like, oh, and I did not have the Longmont Fair Campaign Practices Act memorized. I had read it, and I knew that I was supposed to put that on there, but given that I was running a full-time job in a law firm with multiple offices, and the fact that I was running a campaign, the printer sent it to me and asked for my approval. I looked at it, and of course, it looked good to me. It was pretty, had the message I wanted, but didn't have those words. So I approved it, went out, and I was wrong. The law says that all electioneering communications have to clearly state who authorized and paid for the communication. So of course I pointed out to Valerie that nobody ever puts authorized on there, just paid for. So technically we're all in violation. She's like, well, Brian, nice try, but no. I'm like, oh man, okay, fine. And so I'm like, well, what's the fine? Because I don't want to. And so I said, what's the fine going to be? And she says, well, Sarah is basically trying to argue that it should be $1.4 million. And my heart just went, stop, up into my throat. I'm like, what? So given that I do have such respect for Sarah, I was a little surprised. I was hurt. I was confused. And immediately I'm like, how's that? And so being a lawyer, I immediately I pulled up the Longmont Fair Campaign Practices Act, and that specific violation is not mentioned in there at all. It just says the Longmont Fair Campaign Practices Act has a little blurb at the end that says, any violation of this act that is not specifically mentioned above, it's $100. And so Sarah was trying to make the argument that it should be $100 for every copy that went out. She estimated 7,000 copies, $100 each, 2 mailers, $1.4 million. And I'm like, ouch. And ultimately, Valerie interpreted the statute to mean you didn't put it on one mailer, you didn't put it on the second mailer, $100 times two, $200. And so my next step was, man, I am going to, first of all, I have never liked the Longmont Fair Campaign Practices Act. There is case law, and there is case law out there that basically says you shouldn't need an army of attorneys and CPAs to run for city council. I also think that the fines, the level of fines that we're talking about, really make normal people who would do great as civil servants just decide not to run. I mean, I wouldn't run if I'm subject to $1.4 million. You know, I'm like, are you kidding me? It's like, maybe next time I shouldn't run. It's like, really? That's the risk I'm taking for, you know, not seeing my family, not paying enough attention to my office, and only getting $1,500 a month, $1.4 million. And I think it's the 8th Amendment, 8th or 9th. Well, anyway, you shouldn't have fines that are disproportionate to the crime. $1.4 million for forgetting to put paid for by Bagley for mayor, I thought was a little disproportionate. And so even the $200, but once it was $200, I was like, oh, okay, do I either pay the fine or do I go argue it in court? And then I was like, you know, but people are going to think I'm petty. I'm like, if I go and argue the constitutionality of $200, I mean, that's not unconstitutional, right? And so I was like, well, there is one way to remind people that politics is a blood sport and stop it, right? And at the same time, get people to take a hard look at the Longmont Fair Campaign Practices Act, which was everyone was in violation. I mean, I knew it as an attorney. I look at the reports. Everyone is in violation, and the fines are astronomical. So first option was, do I take Marcia Martin, Aaron Rodriguez, Kathy Jarrett, Polly Christensen, and do I file against everybody, including Sarah, just to prove a point? And I was like, well, I got to work with these people. I don't know if they'd necessarily appreciate that. Sarah had lobbed this volley, so I thought it was appropriate to say, okay, well, I'm going to pay my $200, and in fact, if she and others are so worried about people following this law, well, then they should also follow it. The law, especially since Sarah was a member of the committee that designed and wrote the law, and then she was on council when the law was passed, I just thought that this would be a good, and then I have had no support over the years when I have mentioned it to council, we really need to rethink the Longmont Fair Campaign Practices Act. People don't want to touch it because the law was originally written with the idea in mind that, oh my gosh, when dirty money gets involved and outsiders come in and you know, we got to stop that. Well, when you have a law in the books, thou shalt not kill, it applies to everyone. And so coming after me for $1.4 million or $200, it doesn't just apply to Brian Bagley. It applies to everyone. And so you don't get to pick and choose who the law applies to. And so I decided to go ahead, glass houses, tit for tat, political strategy, whatever, all of the above. I decided, you know what, let's go ahead. So I pulled up Sarah's campaign finance information, looked at it, clear violation, submitted exactly the same documents that she had submitted, except that her fine isn't listed $100. Again, mine was a catch-all. Hers had a specific monetary fine of $400 per day up to 10 days for each violation. And the violation that is alleged that Valerie confirmed was once you reach $250 in expenses for electioneering communications, you're required thereafter for each additional expense, you need to file a report. I knew that. I read the law. Others knew that. They read the law. Sarah interpreted the law a little different, I think. I don't think there was no malicious intent. But then again, there was no malicious intent when I put on paid for by Bagley for mayor, when I forgot to put that on. And so, now we're in a situation where two things are happening. I put the one person who was probably the biggest advocate of the law in a position where she now needs to tell the judge and the people there's a problem with this law. It also puts my fellow council members, the people who can really make a difference, on notice. Oh my gosh, there's a real problem with this law. And so what are we going to do? We're hopefully going to revisit it, fix it, still insist on transparency, still insist on making sure that there is fairness in our campaigning here in Longmont, but we're not going to be unfair. We're not going to be discriminatory. We're not going to be arbitrary. We're just going to have a good law and then apply it to everybody. And I hope Sarah, and I wrote a letter to the editor that basically said, I hope she makes the argument in court that the law is unconstitutional, because it is. And now that aside, right, I might be perceived as a jerk on this issue, but I'm not heartless. And so before I actually I talked with the attorney, I talked with Valerie, and once I pulled the trigger, just like when Sarah did it, there was no turning back. No turning back at all. Once you call and complain about your neighbors for having noxious weeds, code enforcement, it is in their hands. And so in this particular case, I knew that I would not be able to take it back. It's not, people think that once you file charges, you can just call the police and the district attorney and I'd like to drop the charges. That's not what happens. But I did reach out and ask people. I didn't poll them. There was no conspiracy, no cronyism. But I knew that I knew my council members well enough, having worked with them over the last 6 years. And I reached out to the new ones and basically said, just out of curiosity, if Sarah gets hit with a violation, do you think that's a lot? Oh yeah, that's a lot. Would you want to see her pay it? Demand like a pound of flesh or something? No, of course not. Okay. I mean, so they didn't even know what I was doing, right? Or I'm sure they would have told me not to do it. So, but yeah, no. And so when it came to city council, and we brought up the idea to go ahead and look at the law and make some substantive changes, which is what we will be doing, I also floated the idea, as the person who paid the fine, as the person who filed the complaint, so to speak, against Councilmember Levison, or former Councilmember Levison, and as the person, I thought I was in the perfect position to call for change and also to be able to show a little mercy and just say, the point isn't, Sarah, that you pay $16,000, because I don't care if it's 1.4 million or 16,000. I mean, most people can't pay that. And so my idea was just to suspend it. Now granted, Sarah, for whatever reason, as she's doing in court, hopes to resolve this without my help. Great, go nuts. I hope you don't need it. But I just think that 16,000 was, like I said, unconstitutional, unfair, unwarranted, and it was not Valerie's skit. This wasn't up to her. It's part of the statute. It is the law, and that law needs to change. And so some people liked it, some people didn't. But it is what it is, and it'll all play out very shortly in our municipal court under the very, very wise judgment of Judge Frick.
All right.
Kind of a long answer.
I don't really have a follow-up to that because you really did cover it all. Yeah. Everything I was going to ask you, you definitely did answer in there. So, all right. So there was recently we're getting close to the end here. I have a few minutes left, though. But Stan Gelb wrote a letter to the editor, I believe, to both Times Call and to the Longmont Observer, about you putting on a fundraiser for Ken Buck. Yep. And he was not happy about it.
Yeah, I didn't put on a fundraiser. I hosted a fundraiser.
So what's the story there?
All right, so the story is, and when I read that the first time in the Times Call, and then again in the Observer, first of all, I don't know Stan Gelb. I have no idea who Stan Gelb is. And if he's listening to this podcast, give me a call. Would love to take you out to lunch, or I'd like to find out who you are. But I could also tell that somebody talked to Stan Gelb. Yeah. And because, he knows.
He's a real guy. We checked.
Is he? Okay, good. But somebody talked to Stan Gelb. And because I had some conversations after the fundraiser with a variety of people who aren't Ken Buck fans and had the same question. Why did you do this? And his letter... I could tell, at least I believe, reading the letter, that those same people talked to Stan Gelb before he wrote his letter, right? kind of preempting some of the reasons, well, even if he's your friend, you shouldn't have done it. Or even if you don't agree with his stances, you shouldn't have done it. But nevertheless, here's what happened. First of all, I guess emotionally, my wife was offended. My wife was offended that people would question. Okay, so she's a Latina immigrant, homemaker, who is a registered Republican. Why would people be so quick to assume that it's my fundraiser? I'm like, really? And so she looked at me, and her response was, who the heck are these people assuming this isn't my house? Now, and if you know my wife, I run my office. She runs that home. She's the queen of that castle, and everyone else kind of basically does what she says. Nothing happens in that house without her permission and her blessing. So she took great offense to that. And if my wife wants to have a fundraiser for Ken Buck or anybody, who the heck is anyone else to tell my wife who can come in and out of our home? Now, that said, that's not an excuse. That's just my wife's response. My response is, Ken's a great guy. I've known Ken all my life. I grew up in Greeley, Colorado, and my dad was Ken's dentist and his family's dentist. My brother is now Ken's dentist and his family's dentist. I have been target shooting with Ken Buck. I've had meals with Ken Buck. I have been and supported other nonprofit charities with Ken Buck. I have worked with Ken Buck. I've been an attorney for 20 years in Boulder and Weld County. Ken Buck was the district attorney of Weld County, just like Stan Garnett was, or just we talked about Mike Foote, or we talked about Mike Dougherty. I worked in that same capacity with Ken Buck. And I never was on the same side in Weld County with Ken Buck. I was representing the criminally accused, and he was prosecuting my client. But we always were able to work together. We were always able to be cordial. We never agreed on anything when he was district attorney. But he's still a good guy. It's like Mike Foote and Mike Dougherty. I never agree with anything those two guys believe as far as when they're prosecuting my client. Because if we're going to court, I tend to think my client is guilty. If not, or I'm sorry, my client is innocent. If not, I've taken a deal or I've negotiated some type of settlement. But I find it so. I was a little. I wasn't surprised. I was a little taken aback with some of the response to that. The other thing is that again, it's like I don't know Stan Gelb, but I'm like, whether it's Facebook stalking or if someone's parked outside my home, it's like if they think Ken Buck's the worst person that comes in my home, they'd really be surprised. I'm a criminal defense attorney. I associate with some pretty mean people. I associate with people going through divorces, who are crying, who have sinned, who have made mistakes, not only through my law practice, but also through my church. I was taken aback. My first response was, how dare you not only judge who comes into my home, but how dare you watch in the first place? And if you are watching, like I said, why don't you go ahead and watch further? Because you're going to find some pretty people who are hurting, and people who don't share your political or your financial or your moral perspective on life. But my opinion is that, if I chose not to associate with people because they didn't necessarily share my political opinion, I'd have very few friends. So, but that said, Ken Buck isn't one of them. I don't agree with Ken on all the issues. I don't agree on his stance, for example, with the LGBTQ community, or my anti-oil and gas stance, or my renewable energy stance. But I agree with Ken on agricultural issues, or on water issues, or on Second Amendment issues. And because I'm an unaffiliated, there isn't one tribe that represents everything that I believe. I'm not going to go ahead and, I walk solo. I'm going into the prison yard and I choose to walk solo. And Mr. Gelb, I'm sorry you don't. And I'm not part of your tribe. I respect your tribe. I'll listen to your tribe. But I also listen to this tribe. And I also respect that tribe. And so I would have a fundraiser. And the other thing is I would have a fundraiser for any elected official at the state or federal level. If Cory Gardner calls and says, Mayor, I don't have a home in Longmont. Can I use your home? Which is what happened with Ken Buck. I would say, sure, come on in. If Michael Bennett asked me, Mayor, I'd like to have a fundraiser. I don't have a location. Can I use your residence, Mayor? I'd say, absolutely, come on in. Mike Foote. Again, I endorsed Mike. I was going to have a fundraiser for Mike. And the Longmont tribe, the cabal, reached out to me and said, because you had this fundraiser, you better think twice before that fundraiser with Mike Foote. You better, Kerry Kennedy, you've endorsed her, Democrat, gubernatorial candidate, fantastic woman. I said, if you want to have that fundraiser for Kennedy, well, you better think twice because we're not going to support it. They're playing tribal politics. And again, I've said it before, and I'll say it again. It's pathetic. It's disgusting. It's got to stop. Not only because it's a blood sport, and it makes for bad policy, but let me give you a real life example. Okay, so I and other mayors and the county commissioners went to Washington, D.C. We talked about this on the last podcast, and we met with our federal representatives. No one wants to meet with Ken Buck. Oh, no, he doesn't share our politics. Well, Ken Buck's geographic representation is basically County Line Road 1 all the way to the eastern border of Colorado. Over 40% of the geographic space of Colorado, Ken Buck represents in the Congressional 4th District. Now, if you look at the numbers of how much he won in the registered Republicans compared to Democrats, Ken Buck will be our congressional representative in 2018. Not because I want it, it's because mathematically that's just what's going to happen. There aren't many liberals in Holyoke, in Sterling, in Akron, in Greeley. And so when you take that into account, and you're Ken Buck, as mayor, a lot of the Longmont cabal, the far left or the far right, they call yelling at me. If I've got 30 voicemails and I've got time to respond to 20, do you think I'm going to respond to the people who are yelling and screaming? No. I am going to talk to the people who are polite and respectful and are helping me just do my job. And so, yeah, when Ken Buck comes to Longmont, he's usually not well received, even though I think approximately half of the people in Longmont probably love and vote for Ken Buck, and the other half hate his guts and won't vote for him. But if you're looking at, okay, well, I can spend my time today arguing or fighting for transportation funding for the people in Akron and Sterling and Logan County, or I can go to the people who are always yelling at me, refuse to meet with me, won't cooperate with me, and won't even give me their opinion or thoughts in Longmont. Yeah, you know what, Longmont, you need your Northwestern Transportation Corridor funding. There's only so much money, and I've only got so much time. I think I'm going to probably go to Logan County because I'm not going to get yelled at. So all these things are going through my mind, and when somebody asks, I'm Representative Buck, your congressman, can I use your home? You know what I'm going to say each and every time? I'm sorry, Stan Gelb. Congressman Buck, come on in. I know you personally. I appreciate your representation of us at a federal level, even though you don't necessarily share my views on certain topics. And even though others in my community, I think, inappropriately communicate with you in a manner that leads you not to want to talk with any of us, darn right. And as a matter of fact, so we'd applied for a Tiger Grant. And Ken Buck called the Secretary of Transportation on behalf of Longmont to fight for that Tiger Grant. Thank you, Congressman Buck. And that's because there are people like myself who are just nice. No, I'm not nice all the time because we just talked about what happened with Sarah. My point is I try to be nice to people. And if you don't like that, then don't vote for me. I'm not going to kowtow to Stan Gelb. So that's kind of my opinion. That's what I think there.
All right.
And again, Stan Gelb, don't know you. Let's have lunch.
So we're pretty much out of time. Is there anything else you would like to say to the city, or any?
No. I think that no. I just think that somebody asked, why do I live in Longmont? And my response was, God, why would you want to live anywhere else? It's just a fantastic, fantastic town. The people are awesome. Left, right, far right. I just love the people and our community. Just awesome.
All right. So thank you all for watching and or listening. And this is Scott Converse with the Longmont Observer, and Brian Bagley, Mayor of Longmont.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you.
Thank you.